Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back into one of the older Forza games, of course, as you saw from the title, Forza Motorsport 3, and it's always nice to have a vehicle which we can discuss from this game that is genuinely unique, because, as I've said before, there aren't that many. There are a few, but there aren't that many cars which Forza 3 had, which other Forza games don't have. There are some which it has which weren't featured again, but most of them were featured on older games as well, like Forza 2 for instance. So it's kind of a shame that the game doesn't have more unique vehicles, but the ones which it does have, they're pretty cool. Usually the end of the line, for instance the last occasion of the Cadillac touring car, which we already reviewed, and on this occasion you're probably thinking, well, if you're only reviewing the unique cars, or the cars which ended with this game, why is this one here? Because this is in newer games. It's on Forza 4, it's still in the franchise now, I believe. They've got alternate liveries, there's the diesel equivalent now, the newer version. So why am I reviewing it? Well, in a similar way to the Nissan R390, which we reviewed, that car is essentially the same as the traditional blue version in terms of spec. It's just an alternate version, that's why we reviewed it. In a similar way, this is different to the versions of itself on the newer games, more so in terms of tuning. And it's different to the point where I do genuinely think that it's worth reviewing. Because of course an argument could be made that every car surely has different tuning potential on different games. Especially once you're talking about the Horizon games, where you can do full-on engine swaps to a 1500 horsepower level. So why are we featuring this? Well, because the tuning on this car, at least as far as I can recall, certainly not on 5, 6 or 7, but I believe on Forza 4 as well, cannot be tuned to anywhere near the level that it can on Forza 3. Because for those who haven't tuned up this car, the Mazda Lola B09-86, this is an LMP2 car, and it's a relatively unassuming one. It's one of the stronger ones in that category, but most people tend to go for the Porsche RS Spider for obvious reasons. This one, though, can not just beat the Porsche in a straight line, not so much through corners, but in a straight line it doesn't just beat it, it absolutely wipes the floor with it. Because on this game in particular, this Mazda can be turned into an absolute beast, and of course you can see that from the speed and the power in this replay. Almost 1000 horsepower, a huge, truly huge amount of torque despite not being a diesel, and incredible speed. In fact, one of the only Le Mans cars of the franchise to even come close to how fast the Sauber C9 and the Porsche 962 are. Those are the kings of Le Mans speed when it comes to the game. They can go beyond 260. This isn't quite that quick, but it's not far off. Around 257 if you tweak it even more, maybe even 258. Perhaps people have even gone higher. Of course you could with draft, although finding something to draft with this car isn't easy. And that's the reason why I'm reviewing it, because this car can have an engine swap. It's still a rotary, it's a 2 litre, but it's a triple rotor, which can be turbocharged, among other things, up to 991 horsepower and 851 pound-feet of torque. Now it does add a little bit of weight, it weighs 958 kilos, but to be fair, that's still not heavy, nowhere near being heavy. That's well under a metric ton, which means that the horsepower per ton is beyond 1,000, 1,034. Now, for an LMP1 car, or especially a Group C, those kind of power per ton levels are not unheard of. You can definitely get that out of a number of them, or even higher. But for an LMP2 car, that is much, much rarer. Something like the Porsche doesn't even come close to that. So what about in terms of actual performance? Because as you can see in the video, it's fast. Real fast, especially for top-end speed, but also for acceleration as well. It gets there very quickly. But what about the rest? What about the handling? Because this car can very easily be really good or really bad. It's pretty good anyway, but what about with that much power? Power that is way beyond what it was ever intended to have. Well, that is one of the slight issues, because the handling itself is not bad. It's still very good, it's very sharp, you can corner like a monster, of course, and in fact it can genuinely take on stuff like the Porsche 962, because the handling on this is actually better than that. Or at least I would say so, it's sharper, and it benefits from being newer, with more efficient aero, more downforce, etc, etc. But the problem which you can encounter, and it's not a surprising one, is that even with downforce, you're running so much power and more so much torque that you can very easily just spin up the wheels out of corners, especially with traction control, of course, turned off. And I'm running this car with the lowest downforce, so that effect is even greater, of course, for the sake of top-end speed. So this is the kind of car which, if you do choose to fully tune it and release that potential, you need to be prepared, because it's not particularly beginner-friendly. In stock form, it's pretty good. It's actually one of the more beginner-friendly prototypes, but fully tuned, it is a genuine monster. It loves to spin up those wheels, it loves to keep spinning them if you don't keep it in check, and even when you're going up through the gears, it can still have that tendency. So basically, the way to master this car is purely down to throttle control. As long as you keep that under control, it will serve you very well. But, as you'd probably assume, this is very much so one of those race cars, to some degree like the Porsche 962 in particular, not so much the Sauber C9, but kind of, not as much though. It's a car to use under certain circumstances, and if you use it under those circumstances, it will be a weapon. One of the best Le Mans cars in the game for sure. And the great thing about this one is that most people don't expect it to be that fast. Now the problem is, of course, that the online aspect doesn't really matter anymore, about being kind of the Le Mans equivalent of a sleeper car. And that's the reason why I'm reviewing it, because this car is no way near this good on the later games. In fact, it's not even close. Which is a shame, because although it makes the car more realistic, it really does take away that insane fun that you can have with this car. It's an absolute beast, and if you do go back to play the game, this, probably more so than all of the other prototypes, is definitely worth your attention, because this car has never been crazier or more competitive than it was on Forza 3. It's an absolutely insane car, and it was one of my absolute favourites. You could shock so many people with how insanely fast this car was, so if you do get the chance to experience this monster on Forza 3, it is definitely one of the highlights of the game, and one which a lot of people still don't seem to know about, how crazy this car was. So, of course, I'll see you guys next time for another review, but for now, as always, thanks for watching.